Historically, when we think of erosion, we think of the Dust Bowl storms of the 30s, or water erosion that cuts the fields apart in gullies and they're abandoned. The erosion literature today shows wind and water erosion still, but water erosion has since been subdivided into raindrop and splash erosion, sheet, rill, and gully erosion, and tillage erosion has since been added in. Now, the erosional process is very simple. You just attach the soil particle, you move the soil particle, and you deposit the soil particle somewhere. And hopefully it's in a lower position in your staying field. Now, wind erosion accounts for 45% of the 2 billion tons of soil loss from U.S. cropland, and it occurs primarily in the low rainfall areas in the western United States. But we also have it in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, in areas where we've got sandy soils and areas where we have muck soils. In northwest Ohio, it's in counties like Fulton, Lucas, Putnam, Hancock, Henry, and Wood, and others. And any of the muck pockets, like those are found in the marshes in southern Hardin County. And for wind erosion to occur, the wind has to be blowing at least 20 kilometers per hour to be able to detach and move those soil particles. And this is what wind erosion looks like. The larger particles that the wind cannot pick up, it bounces and rolls along the ground in what we call soil creep. The smaller particles, it'll break loose, pick it up, carry it, and salt it into a new place in the field. And when it slams into the ground, it sends a spray of fine sediments up into the air. And the wind will gather those and hold them in suspension, creating a low, eerie fog-like cloud. Now, to minimize wind erosion, we need to maximize plant cover on the soil surface to reduce the wind speed at the ground level. We also need to get those field windbreaks planted to lower the wind speed further. We need to keep roots growing in the soil so that we don't dislodge the soil material. We need to minimize the soil disturbance in the tillage. We don't want any stale seed beds out there. And we need to improve that soil structure by adding organic matter. And for our muck soils, to keep it from blowing, we need to keep that surface soil moist. Now, water erosion begins with raindrop and splash erosion. And if we don't control at this phase, it quickly moves to sheet, rill, and gully erosion. And the vulnerability of soil to water erosion depends first and foremost on the raindrop intensity. Erosion is preceded by the destruction of the soil structure by the impact of those falling raindrops. We worry about the nature of the soil and its erodibility, the slope length. The longer the slope, the faster the water can move down that slope, carrying more soil away with it. And when you increase the steepness of the slope, that water moves even faster, giving it even more power to break loose soil particles and carry them away further. Cropping and vegetation plays a role, as does your tillage practices. Now, soil erodibility is defined as an estimate of the soil's ability to resist erosion, and it's based on the physical properties of each soil. Characteristics like texture. When you've got the sand, the sandy loam, the loam-textured soils, they're less erosive than the silts, the very fine sands, and certain clay-textured soils. The structure of the soil is important. The more you bind those soil aggregates together in stable structure, the less erosion you have. And the more organic matter that you have, the more you feed your microbial herd, and they make the biotic glues that glue those aggregates together and give you that stable structure. And finally, the permeability of the soil. The more the water moves into the soil, the less probability you have of soil erosion. Now, raindrop and splash erosion is the beginning of the water erosion process. And the takeaway here is the raindrop splash can throw the soil up to 2 feet vertically and 5 feet horizontally. And if you're on a sloping soil, it throws it a lot more horizontally. And here's another picture that shows you notice the crater created by the raindrop impact. And you see more soil particles thrown down slope than up. And then as the surface is sealed, that sheet of water moves the broken soil aggregates down slope. Now, okay, let's get the right one. The real story about the raindrop impact is the kinetic energy of the raindrop. And we've put the formula for it up here. And what that formula says is the energy of the raindrop increases dramatically as it gets larger in size and it falls faster. Now, the large raindrops weigh more. The mass of a 5 millimeter water droplet is 125 times that of a 1 millimeter water droplet. And the terminal velocity of that 5 millimeter water droplet is twice that of the 1 millimeter droplet. And that means that 5 millimeter water droplet has 500 times the destructive energy of that 1 millimeter droplet. And why am I telling you this? It's because the people that come and talk to us from Heidelberg College about dissolved reactive phosphorus in Lake Erie, they've been telling us for the last 15 to 20 years that the spring rainstorms have been becoming more intense and more flashy. And what that means is larger raindrops and more of them. Greater destruction of soil aggregates to the place where a single spring rainstorm can wash away up to 5 tons of soil per acre. And this slide will help you visualize how that's even possible. At the top, we've got the coarsest sands. At the bottom, we've got the finest sands. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop the same 3.5 millimeter water droplet at 6 meters per second and watch the impact. On this top one, when you drop that water droplet, it spreads out, sinks in, and throws no soil with it. On the bottom one here, when that water droplet hits, boom! You get an explosion of soil material into the air. And look at how much soil material is displaced by one 3.5 millimeter water droplet. And look at the hole that that water droplet made. Things also to remember, as the rainfall intensity increases from left to right, the raindrop size increases from less than 2 millimeters to 3, all the way up to 6 millimeters in size. Now, the effect of the raindrop on the sloping field is something we really have to worry about, because research shows us that that raindrop dislodges the soil particles, and more particles will move downslope than will move upslope or sideways. And those particles that move downslope are thrown with greater velocity downslope, which means they'll go farther, and when they smack the ground, they'll have enough impact to break loose more soil particles. And the takeaway here, this is important because splash erosion does the greatest damage on our sloping soils. It washes away the finer and lighter materials in our broken soil aggregates, the fine sands, the silts, the organic matter, and the clay-sized particles. And these broken particles will join with water from the raindrops, and as they sink into the soil, they'll plug the soil pores that normally would take that rainwater in. Another thing to remember is wet soil breaks down easier. As you start to wet up that soil material, it loses soil strength. As you continue to add more water to it, it becomes plastic and will deform. And if you continue to add more water to it, you can even make it flow like a liquid. Now, the one thing I want you to remember is rain and runoff water work together like a pair of thieves. Unless we have the raindrops hitting the bare ground, breaking loose those soil aggregates, the runoff water can't do much damage. Unless we have the runoff water to carry away those broken soil aggregates, raindrop impact can't do much damage. Now, we've got the raindrop and splash erosion is the primary cause of soil detachment and disintegration on our flatter soils, so we can still mess up our flatter soils. And soil splash increases after the soil wets up and the soil loses strength and the kinetic energy of the storm increases. And raindrop and splash erosion is greatest and most noticeable during short duration, high intensity rainstorms. So to recap, we got the raindrops hitting the bare soil, breaking those soil aggregates loose. Soil splash throwing the particles into the air. Pores starting to plug as the water sinks into the ground. Water starts flowing over land as a sheet, and that brings us sheet erosion. And sheet erosion results in the loss of the finest soil materials that hold the organic matter and the nutrients. And at this point, raindrop erosion is still the most important fact here, because raindrops fall at 20 to 30 feet per second, while the overland flow velocity is only 1 to 2 feet per second. And the definition for sheet erosion is it's the detachment of soil particles by raindrop impact and the removal downslope by water flowing as a sheet instead of in a defined channel or a rill. And the important thing to remember is the cloudburst that produces these broad sheets of water are of brief duration, and the soil only moves a short distance. But that runoff water that's starting is filled with sediment, a potentially highly erodible force. Because of this fact, in many erosion papers, the term sheet erosion is being replaced by the term inter-rill erosion, because sheet erosion is a very short-term phenomenon before it gets to something more serious. And as we've got the movement of soil by raindrop splash and transport by this thin surface flow, as it continues, the erosive capacity is increased by turbulence generated by further raindrop impact. And as this runoff increases and it picks up speed, it starts to cut differentially, and that brings us the formation of rills. Rills that can be just an inch or two deep, or these larger concentrated rills that can be up to a foot in depth. Rill erosion occurs as water moves downslope by gravity, and it tends to concentrate itself in channels we call rills. At this point, the raindrop impact is still breaking apart those soil particles, but the runoff water has built up enough momentum on its own to break loose soil particles. And those soil particles that it carries away act like an abrasive sandpaper that work to deepen and widen our rills. And the amount of destruction that this water does depends upon the length and the steepness of the slope. And as Jim Horman has told us over the years, as you double the speed of your runoff water, you increase its ability to cause erosion 2 to the 6th power. The literature says that you can erase those rills by tillage. But is this really the rest of the story when you've got these rills that can be up to a foot in depth? Now, to plant these fields, you're going to have to get out there with a tillage tool. You may start with a disc. You may finish it with a field cultivator and some rolling baskets, or you might get out that shiny new vertical tillage tool to finish leveling that field up. But the thing you need to remember as you're moving soil material across to level up these rills, that material is still fluffed up. It hasn't consolidated yet. And it won't consolidate much until you get that first light rainstorm on it, so gravity can pull that soil material down in. But what about this concentrated ephemeral rill here? What would happen if we put a time-lapse camera on there and watched that soil material sink down in? Would that soil material that you brought across that field, would that fill completely? Or would there be a slight depression on the surface of where that rill was, which will be the channel that starts erosion starting in that field again? Now, the takeaways from rill erosion is you're losing the organic rich layers of the A horizon. You're losing nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, and other. But you're also losing the silt size and the colloidal clays, which hold your nutrients. And these are moved preferentially, leaving behind a soil that is more sand and clay rich. Your topsoil depth is decreasing, which leads to less rooting depth and more plant moisture stress. And these first 4 points we're going to talk about later in the second part of my talk in greater detail. But the transported sediments can cause you problems too, because they can wash away your newly planted crops, and the deposited sediments can cover those newly planted crops, either smothering them or delaying the early growth, which is so important for your yield potential for your crop. Now, we've got the sheet erosion working. We formed the rills. They all come together to form gully erosion. And erosion does the most damage where all forms of erosion work, whether it's raindrop, splash, whether it's sheet erosion, whether it's gullies. But these gullies are more than a foot in depth, and they happen mainly on the long, steeper slopes. But there's a couple of takeaways here too. These, not yet. These dark areas that you see out in the field, entire sections of topsoil have been detached, moved, and transported to another portion of that field. But because these gullies are more than a foot deep, you're washing away 3, 4, 6, maybe 8 inches of subsoil. Subsoil is more clay-rich, less nutrient-dense, and you're burying that fertile topsoil with the subsoil, making an area of that field that's going to be less productive for years to come. But you also want to think about getting those grass waterways in there so you can move the water off the slopes at a non-erosive velocity. But as a manager, you ought to be thinking, first off, am I tilling this field too much? Secondly, is my crop rotation too intense if I've got this many rills and gullies? And third, should I be planting more cover crops out here? We need those roots to uphold the soil in place. We need the vegetation to intercept that raindrop impact to prevent this type of erosion. And finally, we come to tillage erosion. And the thing about tillage erosion, it doesn't make any difference which way you plow, up and down slope or across the slope, or what type of tillage tool you use. The net movement of soil is down slope more than upslope. And the definition of tillage erosion is the progressive downslope movement of soil by tillage. During tillage, you lift the soil, and then gravity moves the soil downhill. Also, tillage erosion levels your field. What happens is you're taking the top off of this hill, and it ends up down here in this depressional area, flattening this slope, leaving a hill that's less tall. And unlike water erosion, tillage erosion is not strongly affected by the length of your slope. If you've got more of your hilly fields, tillage erosion is the dominant erosive force. And tillage erosion is greatest with frequent intensive tillage. Now, the rate and magnitude of tillage erosion is controlled by your type of tillage equipment and the implement's design, by the topography, the slope curvature, and the steepness of the slope, the speed, depth, and direction of tillage. Deep tillage lifts, carries, and disturbs more soil, but speed of tillage moves more soil further. And the additive effect of years of combined wind, water, and tillage erosion is a shallower topsoil on the upper slope and a deeper topsoil in the depressional areas. There are changes in soil properties that affect crop productivity. Properties like organic matter content, texture, nutrient holding capability, and water holding capacity that we will speak about more in a couple of minutes. And researchers from the Agricultural Research Service have found that the plant growth and yield were linked to changes in soil properties caused by tillage erosion. And here we have the poster child for tillage erosion. Look how bare those upper slopes are. You've lost much of your topsoil, you lost all of your organic matter and your nutrient and water holding capacity from it. But look how lush and dense the vegetation is as you come to the lower parts of the slope. The thing you need to think about is tillage is bringing soil material down, as does raindrop and splash erosion. But we're standing on this hillside, and the water erosion can take soil down to this depression. And that depression is on a 5 to 6% grade. If we don't keep vegetation down there, that soil material can continue to move off site. Now, how much soil can we move through tillage? The moldboard plow moves 313 kilograms of soil material per meter of tillage length. The chisel plow, about half that. The tandem disc, about half of the chisel plow. And our lighter secondary tillage tools that we run at a higher speed increase the amount of soil moved by about 1/3. Now, We said the effect was greatest with intensive tillage. So if you're going to till this field and work it down and plant it conventionally, you're going to move 313 kilograms of soil material per meter of tillage length. Then you're probably going to disc it at least once, maybe twice. There's another 140 kilograms of soil material. And if you run a light cultivator ahead of that seeder, there's almost 100 more. To the place, before you get the first seed in the ground, you've moved up to 550 kilograms of soil material per meter of tillage length. Now, all those references that we had were from South Dakota. So the Midwest doesn't have any problems with tillage erosion, does it? Unfortunately, we do. And we first noticed it when we were working up in Wood County on the St. Clair soils on 6 to 12% slopes. We ran the soil transects on till fields, and we're amazed at what we found. We found a wooded side slope at the edge of the fields, found the same soil. We ran a transect there, and we were amazed when we compared the two, because in that tilled field, we had lost several horizons of soil material from tillage erosion. Well, we got reorganized and moved off of the Great Black Swamp onto the Indiana-Ohio till plain, where we inherited 3 counties from eastern Indiana with significant amounts of tillage erosion. That's Blackford, Grant, and Jay counties. They've got Glenwood soils on 2 to 6% slopes with severe erosion and significant amounts of clay material plowed up into the topsoil over the years. There are also other counties in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, and nearby states where we have tillage erosion along those slope breaks to the drainage ways. Now, how do we change the erosion picture on your farm? By regenerating your soil. We begin by reducing tillage, ultimately being to a no-tiller, but if you need to use strip till to get there, do so. We need to increase the organic matter in your soil, because your soil is alive, and the organic matter is what feeds that living microbial herd. We need to eliminate raindrop and splash erosion, which is the beginning of water erosion. We need to keep that soil surface covered with a growing crop and live roots in the soil as much of the year as possible. But we also need to get those cover crops out there when you don't have the cash crop in the field. We need to maintain a diversity of those plant roots and plant root sizes. It's important that we have the fine grassy roots, which break down and give us the organic matter that feed the microbial herd, that glue those soil aggregates back together so we have increased till and increased water infiltration. But we need the tap-rooted cover crops also. We need to bore through those compacted layers. We need to bore into that clay-rich subsoil, making areas that the roots can explore next year for nutrients and moisture. Remember, absorb and control. You can reduce the destruction of soil aggregates if you absorb the energy of the raindrop impact and if you reduce the flow rate of the runoff water. Now, the second part of my talk is the effect of erosion on soil productivity. And the folks from Iowa State found a direct relationship between the amount of topsoil loss and the amount of crop production loss. If you lose 2 inches of topsoil, you lose 15% of your crop production. If you come over here to 6 inches, which would equate to severe erosion in any state in the United States, you lose 30% of your crop production. But this February, I saw a webinar where a farmer from the Practical Farmers of Iowa organization was speaking, and he talked about their roadside rest areas. They have soil columns that showed in the 1850s they were farming 15 inches of topsoil. Today, they're farming 6 inches of topsoil. That's 9 inches of soil material lost, which equates to more than 50% reduction in what you could hope to produce. Now, the folks from Oklahoma, they looked at it differently. They put together a yield index based on their slope breaks, the different types of erosion, and whether they had a favorable or an unfavorable subsoil. The unfavorable subsoil is thinner, it's denser, so the roots cannot explore as much. And what they found is if you got 0 to 2% slopes, severe erosion, and a favorable subsoil, you have 90% of your crop production available to you. But if you have that same slope and that same erosion and an unfavorable subsoil, you only have 80% of your crop production available. And what they found is as the slopes increased, that loss of production potential was maintained. Now the folks from Indiana, they looked at 3 moderately well-drained sloping soils and 4 soil properties to see what erosion did. First column is clay content, and we find with moderately eroded Miami soils, they have 18% more clay in the topsoil. Severely eroded, you have 44% more than what we find in slightly eroded Miami. But look down here at the Morley, 28.4% clay and severe erosion. Folks, that's a clay loam surface texture, not the silt loam textures that you have in the less eroded phases of Morley. Let's look what happened to organic matter. Moderately eroded Corwin has 17% less organic matter than slightly eroded Corwin, and severely eroded has 39% less. And because the Miami and Morley soils are less organic rich, they've got 10 to 20% less organic matter in the topsoil. What happens to the nutrients? Look at moderately eroded Miami. You've got 9% less phosphorus in the surface. Severely eroded, you've got 28% less. And you look at Corwin and Morley, you've lost even more. And what's even more damning is what happens with plant available water. Corwin's got 24% less plant available water in the soil profile than slightly eroded. And severely eroded's got even less, at 49% less. And Miami and Morley have even greater losses. And the reason this is so damning, the plant available water is what holds those leaves open in the hot, dry portions of the summer. So you can produce the photosynthetic products that will bring you the yield that you will harvest in the fall. And how much less will you harvest in fall because of severe erosion? They looked at that also. And this is what the 3, 6, and 10-year study shows for how much less you will harvest from those severely eroded fields. They also did a literature search across erosion and productivity studies in the Midwest, and what they found is there was a significant trend toward reduced in yield and decreased available water holding capacity. But look at all these data gaps here. We always want to encourage researchers, grab the soil samples you need, run the tests. If you don't have the time to grab the samples, talk with your NRCS soil scientists, see if they can help grab the samples for you so you can get the test done so we can eliminate all these data gaps.